Welcome, welcome, dear guests. I see you are joining online. We'll start in 5 seconds. Welcome, welcome. People are joining. I think we can start the webinar. So, welcome to our SSH webinar, Beyond Traditional PAM, Securing Your Future Without Keys. My name is Lauri Koponen, and I'm the communication lead here at SSH, Communication Security. Hello from Helsinki. And I will be your host today in this webinar. You can ask questions during the event, writing them in the chat, and we will address those during the Q&A session. But please, I encourage you, write your questions already during the speaking sessions, so we will have time to go them through. Here is the agenda of the webinar. So we'll kick off with a couple of speaker presentations. We'll have short demo, and then we will have short panel discussion. And in the end, you can ask your questions during our Q&A session. But without hesitation, I will give floor to our technical product manager, Juuso Jahnukainen. Please, Juuso, you can start.
So, hello everyone, and welcome also on my behalf. My name is Juuso Jahnukainen, and I'm a technical product manager at SSH. Let me first introduce our company. SSH was founded as a company. SSH was founded as a company around the protocol of the same name. Our flagship product was, and still is, our own proprietary Tectia SSH client and server. Ever since our company was founded, we've been helping customers keeping their secret and making internet more secure. We have left our fingerprint in the bedrock of internet security by working with regulators and IETF to establish guidance and standards of secure connections. However, since those days, we have evolved to be a more general purpose defensive cybersecurity product company. Our current products are in use at over 5,000 customers worldwide, and 40% of Fortune 500 companies are trusting our solutions to secure their communications. That was a brief introduction on who we are as a company. Next, I'm going to talk about how exactly we help our customers to secure their communications. I'm going to talk specifically about our product called Zero Trust Suite, and will later on explain what that exactly is. So, our Zero Trust Suite is a central platform for manufacturing firms, addressing the need to secure automated interactive connections alike between data centers, machines, manufacturing sites, and industrial systems. In today's enterprises, operational integrity and minimal downtime are paramount. We have built our Zero Trust Suite around these requirements. Zero Trust Suite ensures the authenticity and trustworthiness of every connection that is established to critical systems. It enforces robust security protocols and access controls to fortify your business-critical systems against unauthorized access and cyber threats. Manufacturing relies heavily on reliable data and system integrations. Any interruption can lead to costly downtime, and that's why Zero Trust Suite ensures uninterrupted data flow with high availability setup. That guarantees operational integrity and efficiency. Manufacturing companies are not the only ones we serve. Our Zero Trust Suite is an invaluable tool for financial institutions for their secure communication needs. Some of the needs the companies in finance sector overlaps with those of the manufacturing companies, but they also have their unique set of problems that we are suited to solve. So not only does Zero Trust Suite provision access on strict need-to-use basis to the employees of the banks and insurance companies, it also audits everything that goes through it. This is especially crucial requirement for companies that are subject to audits by any auditing entity. Traditionally, auditing internal and external communications with traceable logs has been an essential requirement for these institutions to fill. And we do exactly that by providing audit trails and transparency in data and system interactions. In Zero Trust Suite, you can always go to the archives and see what was done, where, why, how, and by whom. Our Zero Trust Suite solves the issue of secure communication between humans as well. In healthcare industry, it is absolutely essential that the patient's data remains confidential. This has a fundamental impact on the available communication channels, not only from the service provider, such as a healthcare provider, to the patients, but also internally within the organization. For these use cases, we provide our customers the tools for the job. From secure email, which keeps the mails encrypted from any possible third parties in the middle, to the collaboration rooms, enabling employees in these organizations to discuss and, for example, share documents on confidential subjects with peace of mind. And as a final use case example, our Zero Trust Suite enables operators of critical infrastructure to secure the access to their core systems and servers. Every now and then, there's a need to open up the system for remote maintenance or checkup, and sometimes even for third parties. Here, it is crucial to control the amount of privileges and access given to the user. That's why our Zero Trust Suite has built-in mechanism for just enough access in just-in-time fashion. In security terms, this means reducing the attack surface and reducing the potential extent of the damage. And in these scenarios, the overall security of the infrastructure is improved by leaving behind the outdated concepts of static credentials that are passwords and keys, and instead utilizing temporary, short-lived access tokens or certificates, which are centrally controlled and provisioned per connection. And as you probably guessed, that is exactly how we handle access with Zero Trust Suite. As a conclusion, Zero Trust Suite is a holistic communication security platform which ensures secure message transfer between humans, applications, systems, machines, data centers, sites, whether they are on-prem, in cloud, or both, as in hybrid environments. And all of this communication and access is then provisioned and managed within the principles of just enough access and just in time to eliminate prolonged and even permanent access credentials, which are always in a risk of getting leaked, stolen, or phished. And all of this is wrapped in quantum-safe algorithms, which keep your data secure well into the future and in the era of quantum computers. Now I will hand over the slides to my colleague Saketh, who will talk about the current cybersecurity landscape and emerging trends. Go ahead, Saketh.
All right, thank you, Juuso. All right, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Are passwords still reliable? When we talk about any access, that goes into critical infrastructure, the most common way of accessing those machines is through passwords. And several organizations spend a lot of money in making sure those passwords are secured and rotated constantly so that they won't be abused. But nonetheless, like if you work with passwords on a day-to-day basis, I'm pretty sure, I've spoken to if I speak to 10 people, 9 out of them express frustration. That's because when I started my IT career, it was the industry standard was like six letter password. Now that shot up to 13 characters. And, I can only imagine that going longer, but the tools are also getting more and more sophisticated. And even with all the complexity we introduce into the passwords, they are still susceptible for, abuse. And every now and then, we hear passwords being stolen in, many different ways. It can be through credential stuffing, password spraying, People have been known to use key logging softwares. Phishing scams are more common. So there are multiple ways the passwords are being stolen and they are being used. And when you look at organizations like around their security policy and all that stuff, you'll see a long list. Hey, don't use passwords there. Don't use passwords here. Make sure you do this and do that. All this for securing a simple credential, yet important one, that can give you guys access into a production environment. So they play an important role, but the controls or the passwords, the way they are, they are, they were working back in the day, but I don't believe that they are going to be a solution for the future. And I want to back it up with some numbers. When we looked at several market studies and we spoke to a lot of our clients, potential clients, one thing was there was one thing that echoed very clearly. There is a fundamental flaw with respect to passwords. Around 70% of employees tend to use the same password at work. Now, let's be honest. I mean, we have multiple work-related accounts and personal accounts. There is no way we'll be having, a password, a unique password for every one of those accounts, and there is no way we're going to remember every single one of them. It's just human behavior, and that is very evident. And when we look at, what are the causes for typical data breaches, passwords are among the top 3 consistently. And then if you also look at, in general, like, how many passwords, people tend to use, 60% of the passwords a user has are more or less the same. They are very close and they can relate to each other. So it doesn't take a whole lot of computing power to reverse engineer what kind of passwords a person is going to use. And this is the last one is the most important one. I've heard a lot of opinions from IT leaders and industry experts that they are worried that the passwords within their organization are susceptible to be stolen, and they could be used against them. And that kind of prompts us, like, to really examine how what kind of risk they present to the organization. That is when we drill down into the most common causes of initial data breach. These, what you see on the screen, show up consistently. It all starts with unauthorized access. That's a no-brainer. But what we see beyond that is weak passwords, or passwords that are left in plain text. And there is a very common, and there is also a common credential that's not talked about a lot, but it does play a big role. Those are the SSH keys. So normally when we think about credentials, people are quite familiar with passwords, PKI, and secrets. There is a 4th credential, which is SSH keys. For a long time, people think, hey, these are just something that work behind the scenes. We don't really use them that much. The reality is quite contrary to that. SSH keys can also have a profound impact on access within your infrastructure, and they can present significant risk. And I'll be able to elaborate on that in the next few minutes. In addition to this, obviously there is a credential theft and also third-party devices, that are vulnerable and that are, that serve as most common cause for an initial data breach. So how do we take it from here? Now we have seen all the problems, the risk they bring to the table. Now how do we solve that? With every customer we speak to, or every potential customer we speak to, the answer has been very simple. Why don't we go passwordless and keyless? Because when you look at the journey of passwords, it all started when we first obfuscated the passwords. So that's like the first and a rudimentary protection that we can apply. From there, we evolved our practices into rotating the passwords regularly. Then we were making sure the passwords are vaulted and secured. Now we got to move to the next step, because cloud, is a new thing on over in the market, and every major company is trying to push to get as much business as possible, hosted on the cloud platform. And we all know how dynamic the clouds are. And what that demands is any application that gets operated in the cloud, or any security that we are trying to implement in the cloud, has to be very quick. And that is where, like, we want to make sure if we can get to that passwordless authentication, it improves our operation efficiency by a huge margin. And the same thing kind of applies to keys. The first thing we normally see is organizations don't have visibility on where these keys are. Typically, they get to know about the keys when it is actually too late, when something has been compromised, or when they go through a breach and they do a root cause analysis. That's when they discover that, hey, there are these keys that are left over that have been taken advantage of. So why don't we be a little bit proactive and tackle that problem before it's too late? So we do that by getting the transparency, knowing where the keys are, and getting a policy report on what is a violation and what is not. And then we take action by eliminating the at-risk keys. We make sure the lifecycle process is properly controlled, just like how we define controls around passwords, like they have to be rotated, vaulted, and stuff like that. We apply similar controls to the keys. And then eventually we'll be moving to keyless authentication. All this can be achieved through our product suite, which is built on zero trust principles. Now, let me go into detail into one more thing. The essence of this webinar, what the challenges of traditional PAM. One thing for sure is people spend a lot of money on in making sure they secure 20% of their access. When we speak to a lot of our customers, or a lot of our potential customers, they kind of talk about how much money and effort they spent on securing passwords. Now, if you look at different credentials within an enterprise infrastructure, password is only a small piece of the pie. So organizations go through a lot of effort to secure 20% of the credentials. There's still a lot of risk out there that still need to be addressed. The next one is managing static credentials. Again, with the dynamic nature of the cloud, we have to make sure the security can also be implemented at the same pace. And sitting here rotating like 50,000 passwords or 100,000 passwords a day, it just doesn't make sense. And that's the reason why, and even when you do that, you're still susceptible to an attack. Because if someone gets hold of that credential, again, you're in trouble. So nowadays, companies are moving away from static credentials. The next one is the struggle to scale with the cloud. This is something which I was just talking about. Everything has to be fast, quick. Servers are provisioned in a matter of seconds. And the expectation is the access and everything around the server is also supposed to be available within seconds. So when you are stuck in the past trying to rotate passwords or vault them, or checking the password out and then sending it over to the server, that doesn't make sense anymore. And that's one area where some of the traditional PAMs, they have been struggling to keep up with the cloud infrastructure. And we had several of our customers voicing their concern. They are a lot more frustrated. But then again, we need to make there has to be we are looking at, together, we are looking at all the areas where things can be improved and the risk can be reduced. And that's how we end up making a decision. One of the obvious thing is lack of maturity around SSH key management. As I was earlier pointing it out, SSH keys are a very convenient way to access a critical system. Very convenient. This has been in practice for almost 2 decades, and it is still relevant going forward. For example, you create an AWS account or an Azure or a GCP account. How do you think you're going to access the servers? They give you a key. So these keys are not going away anytime soon. So we just need to get them under control. And this is something today's PAMs, they have no clue about, or maybe they have very limited functionality. The next one is the operationally inefficient. Again, we were touching on this stuff. We don't want to, spend a lot of time, effort, energy on rotating thousands of passwords a day. Simple. That's kind of one of the reasons why in today's world you will start hearing companies like where they want to go towards the credentialless access, or you hear the term dynamic secrets. This is where the industry is moving forward right now. Now, with all the limitations or the challenges the traditional PAMs are facing, they are susceptible to bypass. Now, let's think of a scenario where we have securely vaulted a password. And how can we be sure that nobody is actually circumventing those controls? That's a big question a lot of our customers have, because they know that they have enforced some controls in there, but they are not sure how effective those controls are. And on top of all these challenges or limitations, we still end up with a high cost of ownership. And if you go into the market inquiring about trying to buy a PAM or something like that, they're going to slap you with a huge price tag. And that price tag keeps increasing. So it's about how much worth we are getting from that solution, and does it match the price tag? The next and the last one is no granular controls. So this is where most of the PAMs, what they tend to do is they facilitate the connection. But after that, what else can they do? And that's a big question where we come into picture. Once you establish facilitate a user session, can you as a PAM enforce additional restrictions on that session? If so, that goes a long way. And I don't think anybody can actually do that. Beyond Trust does that to a certain extent with their PB run, where you have the command restriction functionality, but the buck stops there. All right, so we just talked about all the challenges we are facing today, and I'm hoping that this is something you guys see in your day-to-day life, working in production environments. Now let's talk about some solutions that are ahead of us. Juuso.
Thanks, Saketh. So, relating to the shortcomings of the traditional PAM Saketh just outlined, we of course have recognized some solutions as well. First, just enough access would mean imposing limitations to connections. One such an example would be a limitation on times of the day when the connection by a certain user role can be taken. For example, a company might want to allow engineers to connect to manufacturing sites by default only within certain maintenance windows, and then reserve emergency troubleshooting access to be provisioned when needed. In this use case, the credentials would also be provisioned only when the connection is initiated, so the active credentials are not simply left there to be used whenever. Second, eliminating permanent or long-standing credentials and moving authentication credentials from keys and passwords to short-lived certificates. There you never have to worry about active credentials being left behind. This would mean in practice that employees no longer have to go to check out secrets from a vault, copy-paste them to a password field of a login prompt, but instead the credentials would be served along with the connection when it's first provisioned. This would also mean that SSH connections would see a transition away from classic SSH keys as we know them now to certificates that have an expiration date. This would mean reduced SSH key management and vaulting burden placed on administrators and systems. Third, by provisioning just-in-time access to company administrators remain in control on what's going on in the session. It will not only be recorded for later auditing, but can be terminated in real time as well. This is one of the benefits of a centralized platform that we are able to provide as well. Fourth, this is a bigger topic. It's SSH key lifecycle management. It covers a couple of items in and of itself. So let's start with the topic we've been raising up with our customers repeatedly. Even if you have a PAM tool in your company to provision access, it is often not capable for closing access from other sources. And what I mean by this is that SSH servers are by and large a default component of Linux servers. And you have to access that access vector. You have to secure that access vector as well. In practice, this means monitoring the SSH server configuration, access logs, and user keys. Because even if you have measures in place in your PAM tool, limiting access of the users, you also have to keep in mind that those users might create so-called backdoors to circumvent these access control measures, which they sometimes view as an unnecessary burden. So even if your official access control methods are up to par and well-defined, you also have to take steps to stamp out this unofficial access provisioning behavior, which we often refer to as shadow IT. And even though we have been talking about keyless access, sometimes situations may emerge which warrant the use of permanent SSH keys. Because at the end of the day, those are still very reliable, tried and tested methods of gaining access to a server. But there's still no excuse for any leniency in the access control domain. That's why we've been seeing key management as an integral part of a holistic PAM tool, implementing all the needed key actions that organizations need to implement to have keys under control. And relatively few measures are, after all, needed to secure the existing, perhaps one could say, old-fashioned SSH key estate. Everything begins with scanning and monitoring the keys so that you know the basics, such as which key provides access from where and how long have the keys been in place. This is especially important as many industries have regulatory rulings on how long a same key can be used in an environment. Another important aspect which highlights the importance of knowing your keys is that, in practical terms, keys very often reveal where your business-critical connections lie. And in order to someday take the step to move towards the keyless and passwordless access, you really need to have that information available to ensure smooth and effortless transition. This is again something that we have thought of, and that's why we are, as far as I know, as firsts in the industry to have a product that can take the existing SSH key-based connections and migrate those to use ephemeral short-lived certificates without a second of downtime and without any manual modifications needed, for example, to the production scripts or programs or the servers themselves, which are implementing these connections. And as the last solution, even with all of these precautions and security solutions in place, user credentials are still vulnerable to phishing attempts. This is where the ability to monitor and terminate the connection in real time is extremely valuable. That alone is not enough, though, since many companies cannot afford to have security teams monitoring traffic around the clock. That's why the connection monitoring abilities must be combined with behavioral analytics engine. That is an engine which is able to utilize the power to terminate user connections, which it deems to be of a high risk. So that was a conclusion of solutions to the common PAM pitfalls that might fly under the radar of the standard solutions. These measures are of course best implemented together since they benefit from one another. As you all know, security infrastructure should be like an onion. And I don't mean that it's supposed to make you cry, but so that it has many overlapping layers, each doing its best to protect the invaluable systems and data critical to your business. That was it related to the pitfalls of traditional PAMs. And just to conclude, the solutions highlighted in the last slide are all available in our Zero Trust suite. And the benefits of moving to such Zero Trust-based access platform contain these 4 points. So, enhanced security posture, achieved by reducing the overall attack surface of your systems and data. Future-proof cryptographic protocols, especially designed to protect critical data from the attack type known as record now, decrypt later, in which data in transfer is recorded later to be decrypted by commercially available quantum computers. This risk is especially high for companies that handle data that is supposed to stay secret for decades, such as healthcare data, personal information, and state secrets. Third, automated SSH key management comes with many benefits, not only related to improved security. As stated, a good holistic access control system doesn't overlook SSH keys. However, managing those keys is another thing. If the key management system isn't automatic, based on regulatory policies, and automated in an effortless fashion, the problems will manifest as increased maintenance work, slow reaction to policy violations, and rampant shadow IT activity. In shadow IT activity, employees quickly learn to circumvent the existing controls without hassle of interacting with established PAM tools. And of course, as the last item, when implementing all of these security measures, you are sure to be compliant to the relevant regulatory frameworks, whichever are applicable to your industry or region. At best, dealing with auditors is a nuisance, but at worst, it can result in fines, sums of which are in 8 figures or more. So now I would invite all of you to reflect upon the pitfalls that were presented, and how do you recognize those being addressed in your organizations? Did you perhaps have an aha moment on some of the listed limitations of PAM? If so, I would highly recommend to read some of the materials we have available on our website at ssh.com. And next up, we have a demo from Saketh. So without further ado, go ahead, Saketh.
Just a little bit in action, what we meant by making sure, we close off all the loops and make sure the access is properly secured. So what you see over here is, this is a part of our Zero Trust solution, and through which I can access a Unix or, any kind of a server in a credentialless way. So over here, every action I take is recorded. So my whole session is recorded, and I can even enforce a lot of controls over that. So we have a UI, but you can also do this through native clients as well. So let's take a quick look at it, where I just click on, this particular server I want to access, and I can access that without the need to know any passwords or any credentials. Once I'm over here, I could just go about, doing my day-to-day work. And all my actions behind the scenes are actually getting recorded. Note that this is completely transparent to the end users. So this is where it makes sure that there is no way an end user can actually bypass this kind of session recording. Now, the most common scenarios what we tend to see is users go through these proper channels and put in the tickets, they access the systems, only to turn around and start accessing them using SSH keys. That is how easily they bypass the controls. So let me log in as the same user, using SSH keys and trying to bypass everything. All right, note that I'm able to log into the system, bypassing some of those controls, And all I have to do is, put a key in here. And that's it. That's all I need. Just put a key in there, and I can easily, work around the system. But with our Zero Trust Suite, you can do more. Once the user, or if a user tries to do this, what we normally do is there is another component to the Zero Trust Suite where you can continuously scan these servers. So typically, I'm showing you the manual way of doing it, but typically these scans are automated, so they can be continuously scheduled. And how that helps us is, as these scans finish, we can identify, the activity that happened where a user tries to log in using a key. So if you see over here, this says like, okay, the user demo admin is able to log in using an SSH key, like using the public key authentication. And the login just happened a minute ago. So we capture all kinds of login information. And when we see something is out of the normal, we can always go back and terminate those sessions or delete the key. So in this over here, we see some new keys over here. It's a matter of just going back and deleting the keys. And once we remove the keys, that access is mitigated. And during that process, what we also do is we raise incidents or alerts indicating that, hey, there is a deviation in typical user behavior. And that is how we can ensure that we can put some controls in place, and we can also ensure the controls are properly implemented. With that being said, now let's go to the final part of it. This is something I hear from a lot of people like, hey, can I take some time in implementing this? Do I have to do it right now? Well, yes, you want to do it as soon as possible. There's got to be that sense of urgency. Why? Because these lack of controls can have impacts in many ways. For starters, your organization would be susceptible to a data breach. All it takes is one misplaced credential for someone to get into the environment, and from there, they spread across. They log into they get access to other systems. Not to mention, like when you are coming from a financial or an industry insurance background or a healthcare background, you are subjected to regulatory compliance like PCI DSS, SOX, HIPAA. And we got to make sure we have controls in place that satisfies the requirements. The next one is impact to organization's cloud strategy. This is something we've been talking earlier. Like every organization is trying to make a push for that. And when you have lack of controls, that means you cannot aggressively go into cloud. That will affect your timelines, and which could have an overall impact on the go to cloud strategy. The next one is an overall risk score. When I worked in multiple production environments, there is one thing that resonates very well with executives, which is the risk. What is the organizational risk? And this can come in the form in multiple forms. It can be from external intrusions, operational risk, compliance risk, legal risk, or reputational risk. And when we don't have adequate controls, that will make the risk score, go in a negative way. Certainly, we don't want that. And in today's day and age, cyber insurance premiums are not getting cheaper either. So yes, we want to look at that. Last but not the least, the operational efficiency. When things are getting more dynamic, we have to make sure our day-to-day operations are as efficient as possible, so we can keep up with the next level of emerging trends that are coming in. So when we have all these things under control, we're putting ourselves in a very good situation. So yes, there is a sense of urgency. Everybody is looking to make a step to make sure they get in and fix these gaps. That's all I have, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saketh, and especially for the demo. It was very interesting to see always in action our solutions. We have a couple of questions in the chat from audience, and I have a couple of questions prepared for you. I suggest that we actually start from the audience questions because those are always more interesting, and then we'll handle a couple of our panel questions. But there was actually this first question: in light of recent data breaches, how does your solution have a protection if a user identity or credential are compromised?
I can take that. So if you look at how traditional, an organizational architecture, like how it is traditionally defined and how business works behind the scenes, identity management systems are regarded as the source of truth because they are the ones which determine who you are as a person. So when someone gets in and compromises a user's identity, all the downstream controls can be compromised. And there is very little thing any vendor can usually do. Now, this is where we play a huge role. In our solution, we started implementing granular controls. One of those controls is geolocation. When you grant access to someone, to your critical infra, you can tie them up with their geolocation. So think of it this way: they can compromise a user's password, but they cannot compromise a user's location. That is something they cannot do. The attacker cannot come, get into your corporate network and then compromise something. That's not going to happen. So that is where like we give our customers the ability to put like really granular controls, so that even if an identity management system is compromised, we can still prevent the level of damage that can happen.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for your question, and thank you, Saketh, for your answer. And then next question from the chat, and still we have plenty of time, so please write your comments or questions to the chat. But next we'll proceed. Do you use blockchains for recordings? Who could start
I
with
think I
Juuso
can.
this one? Yeah.
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, I don't think this is publicly mentioned anywhere, but blockchain is used in our solution to ensure that the logs and audit logs that we collect are not tampered with afterwards. And I can see that your question was specifically about recordings. Now, I don't know about that fact, that do we use the blockchain there, but we do use that with audit logs.
Great. Thank you, Juuso, and thank you for your question in the chat. Now, I will have a couple of more questions which were as a panel discussion planned. So let's kick the first one. So how does your PAM tool address the challenge of monitoring and controlling machine-to-machine connections effectively? And what makes it more adept at handling these connections than other PAM solutions?
I could maybe start with this one. So I think that in the core of our ability to effectively handle machine-to-machine connections is the fact that our solution is based on modern microservice architecture. This architecture allows quite a lot of horizontal capability for our product, so it's able to handle a large amount of the connections. And also, second factor in this is that since we are going on doing these connections with ephemeral certificates, this reduces the rotational needs where you have to log into the target host, take out the old password, put in the new one, and then indicate to the user that you're good to go with this password. Because every time when you take a connection over the network, there are always some built-in delays. So if you can do everything locally, which we do, we create the certificate, we sign it with the private key, hand that to the user, and he's good to connect. So that reduces the overhead that is traditionally built into the password rotations. So we don't have that. We don't have overhead. Do you have something to add to that, Saketh?
No, that's true. Because what we essentially do is we are able to monitor these connections. And when we do that, and we also have additional capabilities on taking an action by looking at the what's going on within the session. And that's where I try to emphasize when it comes to like session recording, there is also one more term, session recording, as well as session auditing, where you can see what's going on through a recording, but you should also have the capability to take an action if something is not going by the book, and that's the auditing. And that is where like we are able to identify, we are able to see what's happening in a session. I can say, for example, from an SSH perspective, when someone connects to a Unix machine, we capture all those commands, and we are able to audit those commands. And if something is doesn't fit the bill, we can always go back and terminate the connection. So what it brings to the table is we have a solution that is proactive, not not and it's not something that we take, we go do something after the damage has been done. We can actually take an action before the damage is done.
Great, thank you, gentlemen. And next question to both of you is, what is your approach to ensure regulatory compliance, particularly regarding access control? And does your PAM tool assist organizations in meeting industry-specific or regional security requirements?
I could take this one.
Okay, please.
I'll start on this one. So this is something which we talk about again a lot and lot. We have the NIST cybersecurity framework version 2 coming out next year. And a big portion of that is governance. See, governance is something that is, people have been, adopting those standards and everything related to governance long ago. But now it is becoming more and more like, hey, what kind of controls do you have with respect to monitoring? Or how do you ensure that every control you put in place is actually effective? And that is what some of the things what we do, like with our behavioral analytics component, and we also have our own monitoring component through which every action that's going into production that can be monitored, and we can generate a report on how effective the controls we put in place are. And those are the things that a lot of these upper managements or executive managements, they put a lot of weight on that. Because otherwise, if we are not if we are not able to evaluate the controls, then we won't be in a good shape to evaluate the risk that comes from inadequate controls.
Yeah, that was a good one. I would also add that these regulatory frameworks often consist of bits and pieces as well. So they require, connection logging, auditing, which was covered also. But there are also elements like role-based access control, credentials which are used once, non-reusable, multi-factor authentication. Those are kind of trivial boxes that, of course, are product checks. But what I would like to highlight also here is that many times access is also in the form of these standard SSH keys. And here again, it comes back to the SSH key management, which is often kind of flying under the radar of traditional PAM tools. So, of course, what is better in our solution specifically is that we can really find the SSH keys pretty much anywhere. And then on top of that, we can track where the connection is coming from, where it's going. And then you have to take all of that information and then see if that fits to regulatory frameworks. And that's another issue, because you have this data all over. So how do you combine that, and how do you come to the conclusion whether you are compliant or not? Well, for that, we have also policies. So we have been studying the regulators' demands, what they want to see from organizations, and we have compiled those requirements into policies. And those policies can be run automatically against all of this key data that we collect. And all is in the end condensed into these small percentages, green, yellow, and red bars, which easily indicates how compliant your system is, and if it's not, where the problematic keys are and what should be done about them.
Thank you. And we have one question more in the chat, so I suggest that we address that. So what do you think is a big challenge when trying to determine an unusual behavior to be able to terminate access before or during a data breach?
Well, I think I can maybe shed some light on the technical side of the question. So here you, of course, have to have accurate training data if you're using AI models so that you can actually recognize risky patterns in the data. And then you also have to have the levels which trigger the actions set correctly. I would say that if your data and your parameters are set correctly, then you should be good to go. But when it comes to biggest challenges, I would say they are those two. Saketh, would you have any opinion on the business side of things? This was more of a technical approach.
Usually the challenge is a little bit mainly on the technical approach, maybe with little connection to the business. And I can explain why. Because I've seen organizations who have like a jump server approach. So that means we know what the typical pattern would look like. And that is something which we can take an easy decision on. If the person doesn't follow specific routes, it can be flagged as an unusual behavior. But then again, we have seen several instances where people can directly access production environments. This is because as these companies are evolving, they're growing. We also tend to see a lot of acquisitions and mergers, and when that happens, all the environment from the sister companies, they are not properly integrated, and all the controls are not properly enforced. So what that leads to is there can be access all over the place. So until we have like a set process, hey, if you were to access a certain production environment, or if you were to access certain applications, this is the process you have to go through. And when we don't have that kind of stuff in place, it becomes very hard because we'll be dealing with multiple variables. And when you deal with multiple variables, it becomes a little bit harder to teach the algorithm like, hey, this is how you need to adapt, and you will end up getting a lot of false positives. So I would usually recommend like we need to have a holistic process when you can classify your IT infrastructure in based on sensitivity or criticality, and then you can have a process like, okay, if I need to get to this part of the system, I need to go through this process. That way, it's easier for us to teach the AI, hey, look for these red flags. Otherwise, it's going to be quite tough. And that's the biggest thing we have seen. Like we still see companies where even with change management controls and everything in place, we still see people directly accessing the production environment, and that is that's a huge thing to deal with.
Thank you. And thank you especially for the interesting question. I think regarding the time, I will have only one more question, and maybe this goes to Saketh. But as a ramp up, we have talked about passwords and we have talked about keys. So you don't actually hear a lot of people talking about SSH keys, like the way they talk about passwords or PKI or secrets. So why should they be talking about it now?
That's a good question, Laurie, because what we normally see is over the period of time, SSH keys gain reputation of like a very geeky term. And it is something that is used by backend developers or admins, and that is something people don't need to worry about. That is definitely not the case. Because when you look at most common forms of credentials in an organization, you have companies investing money and people to secure passwords, their PKI infrastructure, as well as secrets. And they often tend to overlook SSH keys, not knowing the risk they bring to the table. And also, in addition to that, they haven't seen the data because nobody has any monitoring that was done on where these keys are, who's using the keys, how they are being used. None of the data is being collected historically. So a lot of people, a lot of organizations are just completely unaware of that. And that's kind of one of the reasons why when we start having conversations with audit and compliance teams, it's like a kind of a light bulb kind of a moment where, holy smokes, we never realize the risk behind these. Maybe we should start including these in our next cycle, that we need to start enforcing controls. And for me, that's the reason why people really need to keep an eye out like how these keys are being used, because they present a significant risk, and especially if you don't know where they are.
Exactly. I hear that a lot from our different teams and customers. It comes sometimes even as a surprise, but very important thing to handle properly. Looking now at the chat, we don't have any more questions. We have basically last 2 minutes left. So I think we are now going to finish this webinar for this day. On behalf of the SSH, I thank you, dear participants, and also dear speakers, Juuso and Saketh. We actually are organizing regularly these webinars about the future of cybersecurity and about our product portfolio. So please follow our channels and join us, and feel free to contact us also. Without no more words, I will say thank you very much and have a good rest of the day and rest of the week. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Also
Thank
from
you.
my behalf.